The Dune MMO. Bet you forgot it even exists, huh? Can't blame you, you do not hear a lot about it, but at the start, it did look very promising. But now, seemingly, there are concerns.
All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome back. So we have got quite a few updates here for Dune Awakening since our last video. Tons to go over here, including interviews, previews, and best of all, a bunch of raw gameplay footage. Finally, yes, we can see the game running in action. And you know what? Being an in-development survival game, probably no surprise here, it's got some rough edges, without question.
Yeah, that kick definitely looked like it has a lot of rough edges to it, but doesn't seem horrible.
Melee combat in particular looks a tad janky, and this has been one of the biggest early...
Yeah, that definitely looks janky as all hell. And the problem, I guess, here is the fact that it's supposed to launch relatively soon.
Points of feedback that I've seen, and we've also already gotten a developer response, which we will get into later in the video.
Yeah, this is anarchy on the line levels of attacking. Okay.
The TLDR, it's a work in progress, right? Now, on that same note, they even preface the gameplay reveal by saying Dune Awakening is still in beta, it's got plenty more work to be done prior to its release in 2025, so we will continue to hang tight and see what further polishing they do in the coming months. But I'll add, even with these rough edges, generally...
Hey, with everything we just saw in a matter of seconds, there's a lot of polishing to be done, but it doesn't seem that bad.
I like what I saw, I do. As a fan of survival games, pretty much every one I've ever played has some level of jank, and this doesn't look too far off the mark from what I am used to seeing.
Man, shooting an opponent and then they're just going like this, man, that's some major Star Wars Outlaw vibes, and not a fan of that, though.
In fact, I think a lot of it looks pretty solid. The environments and points of interest are really cool looking. Even though Dune's setting is primarily the desert, they've clearly made some efforts to have some variety in the spaces we'll be exploring. They've got quite a few interesting systems and game mechanics in here. I think the base building and crafting systems look great. I love what they've shown.
Okay, if you don't know how this Dune MMO is supposed to be working, it's a little bit like, you know, your typical Rust type of game. You build a base, there's different levels of danger zones where you can go in. Some have sandworms, yes, giant sandworms are gonna be a thing. You build your base, and then at one point there's like this giant storm that effectively is just the server wipe. And you get to keep some things or something like that, and you can build only in safe-ish locations in the mountains or on, well, stone, otherwise you're worm food.
Of the PvE experience with clearing enemy camps and the dungeon diving. This stuff looks awesome, honestly. The Ornithopter flight seemed well done, and while the melee combat does look rough, I thought the shooting appeared to at least have a decent foundation. And I also quite like the variety of spells and special abilities we're gonna have access to that they've showcased, and the movement options between the climbing, the grapple hook, and the grav belts, like
ooh, the climbing seems nice.
Zipping around this environment looks really cool. They certainly still have got work to do before Dune Awakening comes out, but it does appear to be shaping up pretty nicely. At the very least, I am still looking forward to playing it. All right, so let's jump into all the new stuff here. I'm going to start with the gameplay overview, as I'm sure that's what many of you are interested in. So this began with us...
To be honest, the biggest concern obviously currently looks combat and how you move and whatnot. I have said this once, I'll say it a billion more times. There is not a single game that has survived the test of time where you do not enjoy how your character moves, how he looks while moving and whatnot. Everything else is bypassable, but the fact that your character moves poorly and it takes you out of it, that will never work. Same with holding weapons, same with attacking. Now the good part is, they can probably change all of those things pretty easy, you know, create impact effects or whatever. It's probably not the hardest thing in the universe to make better.
Checking out character creation. Now, we've already seen this a few times, but the basics are you start off by picking the look of your character, and it seems like there's a fair bit of customization options within that. But most importantly, you select your mentor, which is basically picking your starting class, choosing between the Swordmaster, Bene Gesserit, Mentat, and Trooper. And all this determines is your starting abilities. Later down the road, you are able to specialize however you like. You can use skills from any of the other classes, which is good. Now, after this, they then moved into the tutorial. The player waking up in a cave wave after crash landing gets the basics of movement, combat, and survival, which is helped in part by gaining access to a Frem kit. So this is basically your early game and on-the-go crafting and survival mechanism. It is a backpack as well as a field kit that after gathering certain resources, this will let you make some of these starter weapons, tools, and consumables while you're out on the go. Now, leaving the tutorial, we are then shown some of the more advanced survival and crafting systems, like the fact that spending too much time walking on the sands calls the sandworms. You want to avoid that, or that you have to stay out of the heat to avoid dehydration and specifically sunstroke. And they showcase what happens if you don't avoid it. You get this debuff, and then you'll lose water reserves even faster if you are in sunstroke. They even have pockets of the world with heavy amounts of spice in the air, and if you don't have the proper resistances or tolerance, spending too much time here will actually debilitate you, which is interesting. We even see some.
The developers said that they are trying to be as close to the source material as possible, which is obviously extremely nice to hear. Now, admittedly, I am not one of those people who is going to say that, hey, if you're making a movie into a game or whatever, that you need to be 100% accurate to the source material. You should respect the source material. You should do as good by it as possible. You should not move out of it, and you should, work in its established parameters. But you will have to introduce new things. There is no way to work around this. If you're taking a book, you can't put it one-to-one into a movie. It just doesn't work. If it was possible to do that, then it would probably be a movie to begin with. You can't take a movie and make it into a game, one-for-one. It's not gonna work. You can't do it in any direction. You can't make a book into a game into a movie, and a movie into a book. It just does not work like that. You will have to make changes. Now, how true to the source material you stay, that is a question, but you will definitely need to make some changes, some adjustments. There's no avoiding it.
Some of the interactive harvesting, this is one of the nice touches that they have in the game. So you've got basic harvesting, you go around picking up items or resources on the ground, you sort of just vacuum them up. But then they've got the more advanced harvesting for larger resources and scrap metal nodes, where it has a mini game. Using your cutting ray, you have to trace along some shape or line, and then doing so
oh, that's pretty cool.
Properly gives you extra resources. It's just, again, a nice little extra touch to what is just resource harvesting. Now, after this section, they then moved into combat, showing several sequences with a few different characters taking on an enemy base. And I gotta say, this is the sort of content that I really enjoy about open world games. So first we see a character climbing up high above a base onto these rock formations. The game's got a free climbing system, so as long as you have the stamina, you're able to climb anywhere in the environment. They then, from the top, mark the enemy camp with binoculars, sort of Far Cry style. And then, and I really liked this, they were able to quickly close the gap using this mixture of a grapple hook and suspensor belt, which lets them launch up and propel forward, carrying the momentum as they glide. And I can tell just by looking at this that it's going to be a lot of fun to play around with, zipping around the environment, approaching an NPC
Oh, hell yeah.
bases like this, or even other players in PvP scenarios from all these varied directions. I mean, I think this movement and this world traversal looks really good. So now closer to the base, we see the player crafting their starter weapon, known as a Mala pistol, which they use in conjunction with some grenades to take out several patrolling enemies around the camp. And I know this might be overdone to some people, but I gotta say, I still get a kick out of clearing enemy camps in open world games, so I really hope they've got a ton of.
Yeah, it's fun. Do people are actually against that? I think it's a very basic thing that most people like. I don't know. Do you not like taking out enemy camps? I kind of do. I love it, in fact.
Them in Dune Awakening. It's simple but really fun, especially if stealth is an option, which it looks like it might be. But even not in stealth, again, using things like the zipping around with the grapple hook and the glide, taking out enemies while you're soaring in the air and then zipping up to a higher elevation to take out more enemies. It just looks really cool. Like, yes, there's definitely some pretty stiff animations here. I'm not blind, I see it, and I hope they continue to improve it. But overall, just the general process of going into these camps and clearing them with all this movement and your abilities and your shorter range weapons. I think it looks pretty cool. So after a couple of minutes of the range combat, they then swap to a melee focused character, and this is kind of where it goes off the rails a bit. Like, this looks pretty rough without question. Really, really stiff animations, even stiffer and less fluid than the prior combat animations. Now,
yeah, again, this is some Anarchy Online levels of combat.
As I mentioned earlier though, the developer has already addressed this, and here's what they said. Our melee system is a parry and dodge based with slow and fast attacks to be accurate with the lore, and yes, what you see in the gameplay presentation is the first iteration of combat as we overhauled it recently in the closed beta. We are continuing to iterate on it on subsequent beta updates right until launch and beyond. We already had experience with melee systems thanks to Exiles, so we decided to focus on aspects we haven't had that much experience before, such as the range/gunplay and the vehicles/flying. This is why you can see in the footage gunplay and vehicle handling have a more finished look. Other aspects we are working to get ready for launch levels are animations, optimization, and so on. This is part of the normal development roadmap and will look more polished as we approach launch. But yes, all of it is very much work in progress, not final, and directly taken from the beta build our testers are playing. We decided it was better and more honest to show footage as it is rather than embellishing it above what is available now, which I think is commendable. They're being honest.
I don't know, how do you feel about the skill cooldowns currently? Seems a little bit long. I kind of get it that it needs to be long-ish, but seems a little bit long at the moment.
With, hey, this is...
Admittedly, we don't know how many skills you're going to be able to get. Maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 5. Who knows?
Is how the game's melee combat system looks right now. And all in all, that was a lot of words to say. This is an early iteration of melee combat, the first iteration evidently. They focused on polishing their other aspects of the gameplay, including the ranged and vehicles, which I do think look better. And then next they will be working on polishing melee more between now and release. And I absolutely hope they do, because yes, it doesn't look great right now, but also still seems like the range animations could use some additional work. So I'm assuming and hoping they're doing that as well. Now, outside of the specific animations and the stiffness of a lot of it, they did show some abilities as well, which I thought were neat. Like we saw a knee charge and riposte. With the knee charge in particular, I thought looked cool as the character kind of teleports towards the enemy and knees them straight in the face. And then next they swapped to a Mentat character and showed a couple of their abilities, including an area scan that highlights objects and enemies, along with the Hunter Seeker, which is like a drone that can one-shot basic enemies.
Oh, this is pretty cool.
Evidently. They also showcase some of the blood extraction, which is a crude early form of hydration that can later be refined to avoid getting the debuffs that you get from drinking blood directly. And that pretty much wraps up the combat section. Next, it's on to base building. So the game uses a territory and blueprint system. You start off by placing down a sub-fief console, which acts as the territory and space in which you can build upon. This also comes with taxes. Oh joy. And then once you have that down, you begin placing blueprints.
Yeah, the Fremens are wildly known for their tax system. I accept it, you know what? I accept it. I think this is not bad. Everything here looks pretty good. Now, I was honestly wondering how it's gonna work when I first heard about the classes. Oh, you could be a Mentat. So what, you're just a fucking giant calculator? Is that it? Well, who knows? Well, we still don't know, but, you know, it would be cool if you're a Mentat, you have, like, the ability to dodge bullets time to time because you can just calculate them flying through the air or something like that. It would be interesting. Then again, what would the Bene Gesserit do? I don't know. But there is a lot of potential here. Because, you know, being effectively an augmented human, a cyborg, well, it's not a cyborg, but I'm trying to explain in an easily understandable way here, you know, being a Mentat could be effectively almost like a human cyborg kind of thing, and all those kinds of all those kinds of different stuff. It could be interesting.
Prints or these holograms of whatever foundations, walls, roofs, and other building components you want. And those can be filled by yourself directly and immediately, or they can be filled later on by yourself or other players who bring the necessary resources. You can even copy a blueprint of an entire building that you make, saving its exact layout to quickly place down in other locations in the future, or you can sell those blueprints on the player marketplace to other players. They move to a later game instance showing what a finished
Player marketplace. Oh my. Interesting.
base full of crafting stations could look like, interacting with a blood purifier to turn the blood to drinking water, walking past various resource processing stations and crafting, and then even going into a fabricator, which they use to construct a sand bike from scratch. After this, they moved on to show some of the open world exploration, the events and points of interest. Some cool stuff here included the crash ship events. So these you see literally falling from the sky. This is like real time. You see it falling, and then if you head to where the thing crashes, you will find a ship just broken into pieces with valuable resources all over the place for you to collect. The rub here, though, is that in a lot of cases, these will also be PvP flags, so you want to go in quickly and get away with your resources before other players show up to take you out and take it for themselves. During the nighttime, they've got these police forces, the security that will scan the planet from these ships looking for players, and if you are caught in one of their spotlights, they're actually going to temporarily lock you in place and then call down troops to your location. Both of these events,
Oh, look at them just descending. That is cool. Lore accurate also. See, this is why you want to be as lore accurate as possible.
I think look really cool, and I hope they have a lot more variety and other things along these same lines. And then of course there is the sandworm. If you spend too much time on the sand making noise, it will draw the worms, and if they catch you, you are dead. Now why bother then? Well, because there's a lot of valuable resources out in the dunes, like flower sand and of course spice. So you want to go there, but you're gonna have to do so strategically and keep your head on a swivel. They then moved on to player hubs. The game's gonna be launching with 2 major cities from what we know. They gave us a sneak peek of one of them in the video, the Harkening hub of Harko Village. Player hubs will have all of the expected elements. You're gonna have
Harko Village. Oh, that is hilarious. Harko Village.
vendor and quest NPCs. You'll see other people running around and you can chat and group up with them, form alliances. There's a marketplace where you can buy and sell goods with other players, and then the faction system plays into the cities where you're choosing to side with either the Harkonnen or the Atreides. And then we've got what was probably one of my favorite things that they showed
Bro, who's gonna side with the Harkonnens? That's a bit much.
showcased in this whole thing, which were the dungeons known as desert testing stations. Now these are predominantly underground, and they will come in a wide variety of biome types, quite different from the sands above. That's because science things happen in these stations, and science is basically magic. So you're gonna, even though we're on the desert planet,
That's a pretty accurate way of describing Dune. Science is basically magic. Deal with it. Well, what you don't have prescience will suck to suck.
Dune, you're going to be seeing a lot of plant life and different variety in these desert testing stations, and I think that was a great idea to mix up the experience. Now, they've actually said that these areas, although they call them dungeons, they're less like traditional MMO dungeons and more along the lines of what you might get in like Fallout's shelters or the dungeons in Skyrim. There's going to be a lot of narrative woven throughout these areas. As you go through, you'll find data pads or audio logs that give you a bunch of information and history about.
So it's more like Fallout than anything else. Good. Fallout type dungeons, I have nothing against them. Now, I do wish there were outdoor dungeons, not just only locations to clear and then enter. But, well, I mean, it's a work in progress. There's probably going to be something. This is Dune. We can easily have a situation where there's some kind of dungeon that's a flying spaceship that you need to board and take out or whatever. There are options. There are also options to go to different planets. Well, not in the game, but there might be. Who knows?
Of the area. And while they are going to be full of enemies in most cases and even have some sort of a boss encounter at the end, also these are bosses that might take, like if a normal enemy takes 5 to 10 seconds to take out, the bosses might take like 30 to 40 seconds, but it's not like 10+ minute World of Warcraft style dungeon boss encounters. That's not what they're going for here. And I think this sounds cool as it is. Now, I would love the traditional structured MMO like dungeons as well, but I like this too. And I think between clearing those NPC bases above the sands and then going through these testing stations below, as long as there's a large quantity of both of these things, it all sounds like a fun time to me. In their showcase, we also saw a couple of new abilities here. We saw a player deploying portable cover that the team could crouch behind, and then we saw someone using a flamethrower.
Portable cover never works. I'm just gonna say it right now. Portable cover never works. If it's only cover, it never works. It just doesn't do enough. Portable cover sucks. It's just not a thing. You're never gonna make it work.
Which is apparently good for taking out shields. And then at the end, they opened up a loot chest rewarding some resources and blueprints.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering about this because we see people using guns, but most enemies should have a shield, and shields are effectively unpenetratable by Well, guns. That's why there's a huge emphasis on melee combat in Dune, because the faster something travels, the more impenetrable the shield is. So you need to slow down your attacks and all of those things. It's quite interesting.
And then lastly, they gave us the smallest brief glimpse of Dune Awakening's endgame, which is all about the deep desert. So we see players scouting out a large spice blow in the distance. They then get in their vehicles, which include sandbikes, ornithopters, and crawlers. And then we saw some cinematic clips of a group of players fighting back other players for control of the spice. So this aspect of the game is what we've really seen the least about, and it sounds awesome on paper, but it's also...
Yeah, we heard about this long ago, that this is going to be one of those endgame things. And the thing is, you're fighting this, but you kind of need to be fast, because if not, guess who comes? The worm comes. That's right.
One of my potentially biggest concerns, like beyond the combat looking stiff, I think my biggest early worry for Dune Awakening is the fact that the end game is like 100% PvP focused. As of now, it's all about going into the deep desert and harvesting spice there. This is the most valuable resource in the game. It's used for...
Yeah, this is going to be kind of questionable. Is PvP... Because games that have a purely PvP focus at the end, well, this style of game, maybe it's going to be enough, but man, people do. PvP is kind of on its way out. Now, I don't mean this literally, but you kind of get the point. A lot of people are turning away from PvP because it's just too bothersome, too cumbersome, and they just want the PvE experience in a lot of cases. Most of the games that have succeeded highly in the recent past now are effectively PvE games.
A lot of things, and the entire deep desert region where you're doing this is full 100% PvP 100% of the time. So they have said that there's going to be no restrictions in terms of like balancing player numbers and groups of people coming together, as the zone is fully open, and barring them hitting server thresholds, any number of people can be in one location at a single time. So games that are like this almost without fail end up just turning into giant Zergfest. It happens every time it's a possibility, with the winning side in most cases just being the group that has more people in it. Now, Zerg versus Zerg balancing is one thing, but I'm really more concerned about the smaller groups or solo players, if they're going to just be unable to do anything in the deep desert, and as such not really be able to participate in Dune Awakening's endgame. Now, when I interviewed Joel Bylos, we talked about this, and there were two things that he mentioned about the deep desert. One, that it is massive, like humongous. It takes a very long time to traverse even by flying, and so there's going to be a lot of different areas to explore and a lot of space in between all of it. And B, because of how it's structured, these huge swaths of sand dunes with rock islands dotted throughout, this gives players huge sight lines as well to see other people coming to wherever they are. So theoretically, if you are a small group or solo player, you could run away before big groups get to you, and you could just avoid the PvP combat if you want, as long as you're paying attention. Beyond this though, my hope,
if doing that is possible, that's kind of cool,
is that they have small pockets of spice blows or areas that maybe not worth it for those huge guilds of players to focus on, but the smaller groups of 2 to 3 people or the solo players can still go for and still engage in the end game, even if they're not doing the big group focus content. Otherwise, yeah, there's a chance that the deep desert being full of PvP with no player caps, it'll just be nothing but massive guilds of players running over everything. Now, with that said, I also think it's entirely possible that once this game comes out, 99% of players don't even spend time in the deep desert, or maybe they go there a couple times, die, and never return. After all, the starting zone called Haga Basin, this is the region we begin in after the tutorial, it is huge. They say it's larger than the entirety of their prior game, Conan Exiles, which that is already pretty big. Joel told me that he expects players to spend at least 50 to 60 hours in this region before they even think about being able to get access.
Dude, look at this. This is going to be so fun to climb.
To the deep desert. So yeah, there is a good chance that a huge chunk of the player base around initial launch might spend all of their playtime in Haga Basin, and then at which point it'll only be the hardcore, most dedicated players who graduate and progress into the deep desert. And then,
yeah, this makes sense, because remember, what, maybe 10% of a game's player base actually reach the end game at best? There's not a lot of people who really truly reach the end game and then play the actual end game. So, yeah, I wonder how this is going to work out. Anyway, that was Force Gaming 10 out of 10. Bye!